Hey everyone, I'm Jean Chatsky. Thanks so much for joining me today on Her Money. If you are a longtime listener of the show, and we know many of you are, thank you for that. You know it is my goal to make money as simple and easy to both understand and manage in your daily lives as possible. And that's why I am such a big fan of to-do lists and step-by-step guides for the stressful life events that hit you every few months, whether we're talking about saving for retirement or investing in the stock market or going through a marriage or going through a divorce so that you know exactly what to do with your money. It's also why about a decade ago, I wrote a book called Money Rules, which has 100 straightforward rules of thumb that you can follow to build a solid, successful financial foundation. But we also know that general money rules don't always work for every person at every stage of life, and they can be different for women. Let me give you an example. The general rule for those emergency funds that we talk about is to have 3 to 6 months worth of expenses socked away and put aside. But we also know women are more likely to take time off from work for caregiving responsibilities. We saw during the pandemic that it was women like us who were more likely to be furloughed or laid off. Research has shown that during the recent bout of layoffs, women were 65% more likely to lose their jobs. And with all of this in mind, if you're thinking you might want a bigger emergency fund, well, I would say I think that makes perfect sense. I always like to say personal finance is more personal than finance. Having a set of rules to follow is a great place to start, but the real challenge is figuring out how do you apply them in your own life? What do you value when it comes to using your hard-earned money? Do you want to expand your family? When do you want to retire? If you want to retire, and what do you want that retirement to look like? Charting out these paths by creating your own personal set of rules, that can be a really good step to living the financial life that you really want. And today, we're diving deep into how you can write your own rules and make sure you stick to them. We're doing it with Ramit Sethi. Ramit is a personal finance expert. I'm sure that you have heard of him. He's the author of the New York Times best-selling book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. He's the host of the podcast by the same name, where he focuses on coaching real couples through their money problems. And he's got a new Netflix show that I hope you've checked out. It's called How to Get Rich, and he works with people across the country to help them achieve their richest lives. He's got his own top 10 list of money rules to follow. We'll dig into those and unpack them today. Ramit, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, congrats on the show. The name of the show, How to Get Rich, kind of implies you're teaching people to increase their wealth, but I know that's not your actual philosophy. It's not about the mansions and the fancy cars. What does rich mean to you?
I love that question because when we mostly hear the word rich, it's such a loaded term. We often think about being driven around, chauffeured in the back of a limo and eating only fancy foods. And I have no problem with fancy foods if that's part of your rich life. But I think that a rich life can be traveling for a month or two every year. A rich life can be buying a beautiful cashmere coat. A rich life can be picking up your children from school every afternoon. So your rich life is yours and you define what it is. And to me, the most exciting part of it is that your rich life is totally different than mine. That's the way it should be. And, I think about one of my students who used my book, and he told me that in his mid to late 30s, he and his wife retired. And they drive around the country in an RV. And that's their rich life. Now, I don't want to get in an RV. It's not my rich life. But I love that they created their rich life and they are living it. And that is my goal for everybody listening today.
Do you find that when you talk to your listeners and your students, they have a hard time at all defining what their rich life is, what the concept means to them? Or even if they know it inside, sometimes they have trouble acknowledging it to both themselves and the outside world.
Always.
Why
I
do you think
always
that
ask this
is?
question. Well, it's like watching someone paint for the first time. They are obsessed with the technicalities of the brushstroke, and a great art teacher knows that it doesn't have to look perfect. It's really about getting out what's inside already. And over time, you can develop these technical skills. So I often ask people, what is your rich life? And I would say about 90% of the time, I get the same answer. It goes like this: I want to do what I want when I want. And they almost pause, like I'm going to applaud them. I go, oh, God. Okay, wow, that's so creative. Now, I'm trying to be nice. I go, wow, so what do you want to do? And they just stare at me with their mouths open. Now, isn't that amazing that we spend decades of our lives going to work, agonizing over the price of broccoli, saving money valiantly, but we never actually stop to think, what is all of this for? What is my rich life? And, the next thing they give me, I push them on it gently. They'll say words like freedom or travel. What is that? Freedom. That's just a word. What I'm really looking for is something specific like this. I want desperately somebody to say to me, my wife and I, or my husband and I, would like to take a 3-week trip to Italy. We want to watch the sunset while drinking Italian wine and looking out over the Colosseum. And we want to bring my mom or my dad or our children with us. That's the beginning of designing a beautiful, rich life vision.
I was speaking to a woman. I'm working on my latest AARP column, and I had a woman write me. She was looking for a financial advisor, and so that's what I'm helping her with. But in the midst of it, we sort of got involved in this conversation of what her rich life, I didn't call it that, but what it looked like. And she said, I'd really like to quit this job that I've been doing for 20 years. It's not satisfying me anymore. And I'd like to go work at a baseball stadium. I love baseball. There are 162 games a year. If I could just find a job where I could be in that environment, I would be really happy. And I thought, okay, this woman can do it because she knows what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a powerful thing that she knows that. And what a beautiful, crystal clear vision. I'll give you an example from my own life. Right now, my wife and I are in New York, and we used to live in New York for a long time. And then recently we moved across the country, but we miss it. And we come back for a month or two at a time. And the first time we came back, we were too busy. We didn't really have as much time to spend with the two of us as we wanted. And so we always talk about what went well, what will we change? And so we decided that next time we come back, we're going to take Fridays off and we just walk. We just walk around the city. We go to our favorite places. And so right before this interview, it's a weekday right now, we were walking and we went to have pizza at one of our favorite places. We did a little shopping, walked around, leisurely day. Walked in here, and now I get the chance to talk to you about a rich life. And I feel very grateful because I get the opportunity to live my rich life. And it can be as simple as eating pizza on a Thursday. And so what I want to encourage everyone is it can be as simple as that, or it can be as extravagant as a luxury 2-month trip or a beautiful car. Whatever your thing is, that's okay. But I want us to stop shrinking ourselves and minimizing ourselves. And I instead want us to expand to ask, what is my rich life? Not my ordinary life, but my rich life.
Sometimes I think people feel like when they share their vision, they'll be judged. They'll be judged by people like you and me. They'll be
Yeah.
judged by their friends. They'll be judged by their parents. They'll even be judged by their financial advisors. And so for that reason, they don't share their visions. And I know you well enough to know that your approach is really thoughtful and really caring. And like everything that we do at Her Money, we've put judgment free in all of our literature because it's not who we are. What can we do to get people through that?
I agree with you, first of all. And I find that the way people are afraid to express their true desires come out in very peculiar and interesting ways. So oftentimes when I'll ask people, what is your rich life? And we go through the preamble, then they'll say an answer, but they will immediately minimize it. So it goes like this. Well, I'd love to have a beach house one day, but it's not like it has to be a big beach house. It doesn't even have to have 4 bedrooms. I mean, it doesn't even really have to have a roof. It could be a dilapidated shack. I go, what the hell? How did we go from your rich life to a dilapidated shack with no roof? Stop minimizing yourself. So I have a little fun with it, and they can, we're all laughing, but they get the message that they didn't even realize they were minimizing their dreams. And so I say, let's do it again. And this time, no restrictions. Because trust me, I want to hear about this beautiful beach house. I'm getting excited. So that's one thing I do, is to kind of gently point out certain things. Another thing I do to encourage people is to show people my rich life. So I talked about the pizza, which is very simple, but I also love nice clothes. Mm-hmm. And, that's interesting, especially for a man, because, men aren't usually talking about nice clothes. And often when I'm speaking to women, in fact, I just recently had somebody who was interviewing me, and I noticed she had this beautiful handbag, just beautiful. Even I could tell it was really nice. I said, wow, that's a really nice bag. And she said, oh, thank you. Yeah, I like to spend my money on frivolous. I said, what was that word? She said, frivolous. I said, hold on a second. And we kept going. We were rolling. But I said,
Yeah.
Why do you think that it's frivolous to buy a beautiful handbag? And she said, well, I could put in my 401k. Of course, she already maxed out her 401k. I go, do you love the bag? She goes, yeah. I go, can you afford it? She goes, yeah. I go, then what's the problem?
Yeah.
So sometimes, what do you think?
I think this is why we work. That's what we say in my house. And I'm guilty of when I get a compliment, oh, I got it on sale. Right. Or I'll minimize it in some way. I try to catch myself, because I do feel like this is why we work, right? I work so that I can spend more than reasonable amounts of money on theater tickets, right? Because I want to sit in the right seats, or the seats where I can see. And I don't feel bad about that. I really enjoy it. And I think the rule is, and we're going to get into the rules in just a second, you got to make some choices. You can't value everything. You can't have everything.
Yeah.
But this is why we work.
Yeah. My equivalent phrase that we use in my community is, I want you to spend extravagantly on the things you love, as long as you cut costs mercilessly on the things you don't. And theater tickets is a beautiful example. You want to go to the theater? Love it. You want to sit in these amazing seats? Amazing. Great. Now, can you afford it? You got to know your numbers. Can you feel good about it? Hopefully you know your numbers and you know what makes you happy. Great. And once you have a clear vision of what excites you, then you can start making some choices about, hey, do I really want to be spending on this or that when I could actually get amazing seats for the theater once a month? That's a great discussion to be able to have either alone or with a partner.
Yeah, exactly. So let's dig into the rules. I have rules, you have rules. I read a study recently that said that people who actually have rules of their own, set their own sort of self-controlled strategies, spend about $250 a month less than people who follow other people's rules. So I do think it needs to be at least personalized. But let's start to dig into your top 10. And I know number one is a 1-year emergency fund. I sort of started the show talking about the traditional 3 to 6 months. Why do you like a year?
Okay, first off, let me just start off with a big caveat, because people always get mad at me on the internet for my 10 rules, because as we're going to see, they become increasingly bewildering and ridiculous. These are my rules for myself, and they will make no sense to other people. This first one we can debate, we can apply it generally, but some of them are going to become really crazy in just a second.
Okay. Well, look, I have the 1-year emergency fund.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably even a little bit bigger than that, because I am conservative. But when I look at, and it makes me feel better.
Yeah.
And that's enough for me, that it makes me feel better and it makes me feel safer. And I'm also maxing out my 401k, so it's not getting in the way of other things. Why do you have a 1 year emergency fund?
I'm conservative as well when it comes to certain areas of personal finance. So I want to have extra cash. I'm already taking care of all my investment targets, all of that. I want to have it because in case something goes wrong, I would prefer not to have to change my lifestyle. I don't want to have to take a step down if possible. And once in a while, opportunistically, there are things that come up that I keep a relatively large amount of cash around for. But it makes me feel fine. I know the trade-offs, and I'm good with it.
Rule number 2, save 10%, invest 20%. Where'd those numbers come from?
Again, I'm conservative. I know that if I'm doing these things, then I can buy all the dinners out and all the almonds that I want to buy. And by the way, I don't track any of my spending for like broccolini. I don't care. It's irrelevant to me. I actually find it to be a total waste of time to have to track every last expense at the grocery store. So I know if I'm hitting these numbers, the big ones, 10%, 20%, the rest of it falls into place.
I agree with you, and it's how I run my own life. But I think that if you've never tracked and you're not hitting those numbers, then tracking is actually the way to get you to those numbers. That you need to know where your money is going in order to hit those big numbers, and then you can budget backwards, which is essentially what you're saying you do.
Got it. Yeah. I think we have slightly different philosophies on that, but I love that. Money is diverse. It should be. And again, my 10% and 20% of gross, those are relatively high numbers. In order to do that, I need to have a pretty high income, et cetera, et cetera. You know, if you're starting out and you can't put aside 10 and 20%, that's okay. Start with 5 and then adjust it as you can.
When you say that one of your rules is to be able to pay in full for large expenses before you spend the money, how large are we talking about? Is that a house?
Yeah. That's
so
why
no debt.
Correct. I have a no debt policy. Now, when we buy a house, we may use debt. We may get a mortgage. I wouldn't be opposed to it, particularly if it was a low interest rate, but I would be able to pay for it in cash. Now, this is why people are listening right now. They're going, this guy's insane. Yeah.
Well, not insane, but wealthy, right? Not necessarily insane, but wealthy.
Well,
right?
I am the I will teach you to be rich guy.
Okay. Yes. As you should be, right? And what do you say to people who say, I really want to buy a house and I can't do that?
Well, the vast majority of people cannot and will not follow this rule. It's my rule. You shouldn't feel guilty if you have to take out a mortgage to buy a house. That's totally normal and realistic. However, let me point out a couple of things. As I have extensively written about, buying a house is not always the best investment. I've rented for over 15 years. I made more money renting than I would have made owning. And this is in cities including San Francisco, New York, and LA. So you should always run the numbers carefully. And you need to become pretty sophisticated. This is the biggest purchase of your life. So you may not have the same policies I do. That's totally fine. What I really want to encourage people is to develop their own rules, just like you said, Gene. But you got to be able to run the numbers and understand things like an amortization schedule and interest rates. These words, most people don't really understand it. But when it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's worth spending the time to learn it.
I completely agree. And I think we're right now at one of those points. Look, it always made sense to run the numbers between renting and owning. But as interest rates have climbed and as rents in some cities have also gone a little haywire, it makes even more sense. And what gets to me is that when people are looking at the cost of buying, they often don't factor in the cost to live there.
Thank you, Gene. You're so right. Okay, let's just talk about this for a second because it drives me absolutely insane. I call them phantom costs. When you go to buy a house, there are significant phantom costs. In fact, here's a simple example. Let's say you have a house, let's say you have an apartment you could rent for $1,600 a month. And let's say you have a house you could buy for $1,600 a month. People go, like 90% of people will go, oh, I should buy the house because I can build equity. I go, first of all, do you even know what equity is? Never mind. What they really forget is that you've got to add, in my case, I approximate it at 50% more to just the mortgage price to account for taxes, maintenance, interest, all kinds of opportunity costs of your down payment. These are phantom costs. So it's not just $1,600 a month. It's not equal. You have to factor in these phantom costs. They're called phantom. They're hidden. Learn the numbers. It's the biggest decision of your life. You've got to know how to do this.
Yeah, and don't convince yourself that you're going to want to move in and not change a thing about the place. I have lived in so many places. You're going to want to eventually change it. I want to ask Ramit a little bit more about some of your rules, but we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. We are back with Ramit
Sethi.
We are back with Ramit Sethi, host of How to Get Rich on Netflix. So my favorite, I have two favorite rules of yours. One is earn enough to work only with people that you respect and like.
Yeah.
I think that is fantastic. Do you have a path for people to get there?
I think that if you have a 9-to-5 job, then you can do this. And if you are an entrepreneur, you can do this as well. At a 9-to-5 job, what that means is that you have enough in your personal portfolio, a 401k, an IRA, a taxable account, whatever it looks like, where if you were asked to do something unethical or you were put directly under somebody who did not inspire you or you couldn't respect them, that you would have the financial opportunity to say, you know what, I appreciate it, but I think I'm going to go a different direction. That freedom, some people, they call it FU money. I find it a little crass personally because I'm not walking around all day just saying FU, FU. But it's the ability to make a decision not primarily based on money because you have enough.
My mother called it mad money. I like that a little better. It was the money that her parents sent her out with when she went on a date in high school, that if she got mad, she could get in a cab and go home and not be worried that she wouldn't have enough money to do that.
I love that.
A lot of your work focuses on couples and couples and money. One of your rules is marry the right person, which clearly you did. But I also know that you and your wife, Cassandra, had trouble talking about your own money early in your relationship. How'd you work through that, and how do you suggest that other couples do the same?
I have a lot of compassion when I talk to couples on my podcast. You know, they come on and they share their biggest money disagreements, and then they share all of their numbers. So if you listen in to the podcast, you will hear a couple with $800,000 of debt, and they're concerned if they can even afford to have children. Then on the other end of the spectrum, I had a young man email me and say, my wife of 21 years is about to divorce me because I'm too cheap. And their net worth was $13 million. So most of us have never heard a couple with $13 million talking about money and why can't we afford this $400 mattress? And you're listening, you go, this is crazy. But guess what? I have a lot of compassion because my wife and I had a series of difficult discussions around money. When we met, I violated my own rule. I'm going to admit it, which is, talk about money regularly and early. Mm-hmm. And we got I think we were engaged, and my wife said, my now wife said, this feels uncomfortable because you know everything about my finances, but I don't know anything about yours. And that's true. She was right. I realized in my head, I could see chapter 9. That's chapter 9 from my book flashing in front of my eyes. I totally violated my own rules. So I opened up, my finances. We talked about it. The next difficult conversation was when we discussed a prenup. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to talk about this publicly because nobody does. In fact, when I looked online for advice, I'm so glad you do.
And I have one.
Fantastic. I love it. Who was the one who suggested the prenup in your relationship?
So I'm married for the second time.
Hmm.
We both did, but
Wow.
we both knew coming into the relationship that we had kids, we had responsibilities. Each we had responsibilities that the other was not really responsible for,
Yeah.
and people to protect, and in my case, a business to protect. And so it wasn't. First of all, it wasn't debated, but second of all, it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah. Well, you had gone through the marriage process and yeah, I love that. And as a business owner as well, there's certain concerns. When I brought it up with my wife, I was very nervous. And some of the advice out there as to how to bring it up, it's really deceptive. Some of the advice said that you should say, hey, my lawyer insists that I do this. I don't want to do it, but I go, you can't even be honest with your life partner. Come on.
Right.
So, I brought it up and my wife was very receptive. She said, wow, okay, I wasn't expecting that. I don't really know much about a prenup, but I'm willing to learn. Cool. That's the best answer I could have expected. And we had the first few conversations. It went well until it got hard. And we were just seeing it differently. My wife finally suggested that we go see a therapist. And I was like, yeah, we should. So we went to a therapist. And I still remember this question she asked us. She said, how do you see money? What does it mean to you? And she looked at me, the therapist, and I was ready to go. I go, growth. In my head, I could see the rule of 72 and compounding. And I knew I could see all the math. Growth, it's so obvious. Thanks for letting me shine. And then she turns to my wife, Cass, and Cass says, safety. And I looked at her like, what? Safety? That's it's like saying money means metal to me. I just didn't connect it at all. And wow, what an interesting ability to pull that apart. And I know, Gene, you mentioned just a few minutes ago that you like to have that money in your emergency fund. It makes you feel safe. Now I get it. That enabled us to start connecting on the different ways we see money. And that really opened up the door to us just finding a common ground.
It is so female too. It's I When I wrote my last book, Women with Money, I went around and asked hundreds of women, what do you want from your money? And the answers, while they were all over the map, were all at the start forms of safety and security. Cash in the bank, a safe car with airbags and backup cameras and blind spot indicators, a paid off mortgage, not just a mortgage, but a paid
Right.
off like all elements of safety described in very, very different ways. And I really think it's not a want. I think it's a need for a lot of us.
I like that backup camera is really good. That's a great example. You would never immediately connect that to safety, but in the context of everything you just said, it rings so true. When I speak to couples on the podcast, a lot of times there will be one person who's a hyper saver. They love saving. They want to save, save, save. And their partner has a different view on money. They go, hey, we have a 28% savings rate. We're going to have X million dollars. Like, when do we get to take our foot off the gas and go on this trip that we've been talking about for 10 years? And I will often find the safety-oriented partner. They have the feeling, the emotion of safety, but they shroud it in a number. And I always say the way you feel about money is highly uncorrelated with how much you've got in the bank. I literally speak to people with $8 million in the bank. They're on the podcast and they are price comparison shopping for blueberries. They're driving an extra mile for gas to save 10 cents. I go, get a life. This is not how a rich life works. And obviously I joke around with them, but I also get serious. I say, look, at what point do you get to stop hyper saving and actually start living your rich life? Because really, is spending 25 minutes comparison shopping for berries part of your rich life? And they go, no, it's not. I go, then let's change it. So that's what I
We
find as well.
we have this dichotomy when it comes to building and then living your rich life that I think is almost wired into the 401k system in this country, right? We are 40 years in the workforce, maybe 50 years in the workforce, and it's accumulate, 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 accumulate. And then we flip a switch, and people are supposed to know how to take a chunk of money and make it last as long as they do, which is, again, scary for women because we could live a really long time. How do you balance the question of accumulation with the rich life? I guess, another way of asking it is, what's your definition of enough?
Oh, great question. I love talking about this because I've been running my business 20 years. A lot of the folks who started with me have accumulated a substantial amount of money. And many of them believed that when they had 50,000 or 500,000 or 2 million, that suddenly they would feel free. And they go, wait a second, I don't feel free. If anything, I feel more scared now. Even when I point out compounding, like you're going to have more money than you could possibly use. They go, that makes them feel even worse because then they tell themselves, I told myself I would feel good by this point and now I don't. I must be a bad person. I go, no. Let's stop all this. Let's start fresh. Let's start with a philosophy that I have, which is I want you to live a rich life today and an even richer life tomorrow. This is quite different than the American structure, which is hoard everything, just save. Nobody even tells you how much or why. Save until someday in the distant future when, maybe you're 90 years old and it's okay to spend on a sweater. I go, no, that sucks. So we're going to start by living a rich life today and we're going to practice like we're going to the gym for the first time and we're going to start building a muscle. It could be using this simple tactic I call a worry-free number. Like when we were in our 20s, we used to go to the grocery store, we see a pack of gum. We're like, yeah, I'm just going to pick it up. It doesn't matter to me. $1, $1.50, it's not going to, I'm worry-free. The crazy thing is as our net worth accumulates and our income goes up, we don't change our worry-free number. So we'll buy a $1.50 pack of gum, but we'll still worry about a $10 or $12 dessert. Wrong. You've got to adjust your worry-free number up. So with couples, if you're listening, have a conversation with your partner. Say, let's pick a number, the two of us, below which we're simply not going to worry. So it could be $20, could be $200, could be $2,000, depending on your net worth. Trust me, I do not want to talk to my wife about a $15 purchase. It doesn't make any sense for us, and I trust her and she trusts me. So that's the first part. The second part is we have to remember there's a season of life where our money is best spent. And I learned this. If you think about the prime years of spending your money, think 40 to 60. Because before 40, a lot of people don't really have that much money. After 60, as we all know, life happens. So we may get we may get ill. We may have to take care of ill parents. Something may happen. Who knows? COVID happened. We saw unexpected life happens. Now, I hope that we're all healthy for a long time. I hope we're all very vibrant. That's what I'm planning. But I also know that there are certain things that I can't do now at 40, like backpacking across Europe, which I did with my college buddy. I don't want to do that. I like a nice hotel. And at 60 and at 80 and at 90, there are different things I won't be able to do. So I'm not saying go spend all your money today. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying think about a rich life today and think about a rich life tomorrow and be strategic because there are things you can only do now. And it makes sense to prioritize those. And on the other hand, you want to make sure that you've got enough to live comfortably for the very, very long term.
We are going to leave it there. Ramit, thank you so much. This was really fun for me. It was nice to see you. And where can our listeners find more about you? The show, of course, is on Netflix, but where else would you send them?
You can visit my podcast. I would say pick the episode with the title that strikes you the most. The overspender, the underspender, the millionaires, the people in debt. Just start there. And the podcast is called I Will Teach You to Be Rich.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.